Parkour is an aspect of Minecraft that has way more depth than the average player may realize. While parkour has always been a somewhat popular way to play Minecraft, not many people know the mechanics of it. After looking at many of the top results for parkour tips on YouTube, I found that only 2 were relevant and neither of them did a very good job of explaining the mechanics of what they were teaching, leaving it very hard for a newcomer to be able to do any jumps that weren't explicitly shown in the video. By the end of this video, you'll learn how to do 4-block jumps, neos, and other jumps without fail, but more importantly, you'll be able to apply the strategies and mechanics you learn, and be able to do much harder jumps as well. Now, just a quick disclaimer before we start. This video is for Java Edition, and unless otherwise stated, everything I'll be talking about will be relevant for all versions 1.8 and above. Also, I'll assume you're using a dedicated sprint key instead of double tapping W to sprint, since most if not all of the techniques explained in this video will be impossible without a sprint key, and if any corrections or useful additions need to be made in the future, they'll be put in a pinned comment. With that out of the way, let's get started. To start, it's essential that you know about game ticks. Many calculations in the game are updated every game tick. Not to be confused with redstone ticks, there are 20 game ticks per second, meaning a game tick occurs every 50 milliseconds. From now on, game ticks will be referred to as ticks. One aspect of Minecraft that's based on ticks is player movement. At the end of every tick, the keys pressed on your keyboard are reflected in-game. Since your movement is only updated every tick, it means you can only move in increments of ticks. This is incredibly useful as it allows for quote-unquote frame-perfect strategies to be executed with relative ease, since the frames in this case are 50 milliseconds long. However, there is a bit of a downside to this. Since your movement is only updated every tick, it means that how the game interprets your inputs may be different from what you actually did. Imagine 2 players hold forward for the same amount of time, but do it at different times. Like in this example, it may end up that differing results will occur. Player 1 moves for 2 ticks, while player 2 moves for 3 ticks. It's impossible to try and time your inputs with ticks, so the next best thing you can do is try to hold down inputs in multiples of 50 milliseconds, as the closer you are to multiples of 50, the less randomness there will be. Ticks are essential to parkour because they allow you to quantify jump timings. You probably already know that getting a running start before jumping will let you jump further than if you just jumped from a standstill. With ticks, you can create strategies for jumps and be able to quantify how long you'll need to run before jumping. The term tick timing is used to describe this. The notation for describing a tick timing is simply blank tick. For example, if someone told you that a strategy for this weird-looking jump was to 3-tick from the back of this fence, it would mean that you need to touch this fence and run for 3 ticks before jumping. Another jump you can use tick timing for is a 3+1. For this jump, you can 7-tick from the back of the block, and you'll make the jump. There's also special names for some of the tick timings. 0-tick, jumping from standstill, is called jam, while 1-tick is called head hitter, or HH for short. Head hitter is a useful timing as it allows you to do this infamous jump where the ceiling above you is only 2 blocks high. There's a better way to do this jump, but I'll introduce it later. I should mention that for all the jumps I showcase in this video, there's a world download containing them all in one place, along with some extra jumps for more practice. For each jump, there are signs showing both the name and relevant strategy in the format that experienced players would use, along with definitions for any acronyms used for the first time. I highly recommend that you go into the description and download the world, and after you finish watching a section, go into the world and practice the jumps in that section, since you'll definitely learn and improve a lot faster. Speaking of extra jumps in the world download, there's one labeled Jam Test in section 1. If you're having trouble discerning between jam and head hitter, doing this jump from the front of the block may help. If you jam, you'll land on the stair, but you'll overshoot if you head hitter. Now, it's time to introduce one of the most important parts of parkour. Force momentum is the act of getting momentum from a small space where you can't continuously sprint jump in order to gain speed. Force momentum is usually done when you only have one block of ground to utilize. Jam force momentum will be the focus for this video. To do this, jam, without sprinting, from the back of a block and start sprinting mid-air. Note that the longer of a delay there is between when you jam and when you start sprinting, the less distance you'll achieve. Optimally, you should have a 1-tick delay between when you jam and when you start sprinting, but for many jumps, a longer delay also works. The most common jumps that you'll use force momentum on are 3+1s and 4-block jumps, both of which are jumps that the average player considers hard. However, with this strategy, they both become trivial. You may ask what the point of force momentum is, considering you can just run and jump for many of these harder jumps. The extra speed you get from doing force momentum instead of just a tick timing allows it to be a very lenient method of doing most jumps with just one block of momentum. For this 3+1 in particular, you can do anything from a 1-tick delay between jamming and sprinting, to an 8-tick delay, which is a 7-tick window. Notice these keystrokes from the previous two clips. Both were able to do a 3+1, despite a large difference in timing. This leniency is why force momentum is such a useful strategy. Comparatively, if you did a tick timing from the same location, you would have to do a 7-tick, leaving you with just a 1-tick window. From this, it may seem like tick timings are bad, but the effectiveness of force momentum dwindles as you stray further from one block of momentum. On another note, you may have noticed that the jam in jam force momentum is a tick timing. Force momentum can be done after running for any number of ticks, such as head hitter force momentum and 2-tick force momentum. These kinds of force momentum are much less useful, but you'll still occasionally find uses for them. You execute these strategies just like jam force momentum, but instead do the respective tick timing rather than jam. For example, this is what 2-tick force momentum can be used for. You walk for 2 ticks before jumping, then sprint mid-air. As I just said, jam force momentum is much more useful than all of the other kinds of force momentum. But why exactly is that? For one, it's much more common to see a single block of momentum as a starting point for your jump, which jam force momentum is the best strategy for. Jam is also considered one of the easiest tick timings since you just need to sprint and press jump at the same time. There's one more reason though, which I'll get into now. Taps are a technique that are very important when doing higher level, more precise jumps. A shift tap is simply when you press a movement key for 1 tick while shifting. There's also unshift taps, which are just shift taps but without shifting. And air shift taps, which are shift taps while airborne. The distance you get from air unshift taps is inconsistent as it depends on when you tap while airborne, and thus they are not used. When executing or creating strategies for precise jumps, taps are used as a reliable way to go a short, fixed distance. When doing taps, be sure you're only moving for 1 tick per tap, and that you're at a standstill before doing the next tap, if applicable. Also note that taps are different between versions 1.8 and 1.9+, as the distance you move when doing taps is slightly larger in 1.9+. This video will only focus on 1.8 tapping. This is an example of a jump strategy involving taps. From the back, you can do 2 shift taps and 2-tick to make the jump. Or, for this jump, you can do 1 shift tap and 5-tick. Now that you know the basics of taps, remember how I said that I had one more reason for why jam force momentum was better than the other tick force momentums? Well, strategies that involve non-jam force momentum may also be possible with doing taps, then doing jam force momentum. Take a look at this jump from before. You could do 2-tick force momentum, as shown earlier, or you could do 3 unshift taps, then jam force momentum. This is another jump with a similar situation. You could do head hitter force momentum, or you could do 2 unshift taps, then jam force momentum. It's mostly up to personal preference as to which kinds of strategies you prefer, but this is an instance of even more kinds of jumps being possible with jam force momentum. Running then jumping is one way you can do jumps, but doing the opposite is a viable alternative. Jumping in place, then running after is called Pessi, and is one way you can get momentum from a small space. Similar to tick timings, the notation for describing a Pessi timing is simply negative blank tick Pessi. Take this jump for example. If you wanted to use Pessi, one shift tap the negative 2 tick Pessi would be a strategy. Now, Pessi is already a decent addition to your toolkit, but there's one more aspect that'll make it even more useful. But to understand what I'm about to show, you first need to know that when holding jump, the game will only let you jump at most every 10 ticks. And it just so happens to be the right amount of time to be able to do this. You can do -1, -2, or -3 tick Pessi, and you'll always make the jump out of the 2-block ceiling. Note that for -3 tick Pessi, it means that you land before sprinting, and the mod I'm using will interpret your movement as a tick timing instead. Using Pessi for 2-block ceiling jumps is a much better alternative to head hitter, since you have a 3-tick window rather than a 1-tick window. Doing Pessi will also make you jump further. To be able to do Neos easily, the key is to understand the difference between the X and Z axis of Minecraft. In versions below 1.14, if you're moving on the Z axis and come into contact with the corner of a block, you'll appear to just go through it when comparing what happens when you're moving on the X axis. This phenomenon is referred to as X-facing and Z-facing and occurs due to the way that Minecraft updates player movement. Jumps with obstacles, such as Neos, are usually considered easier Z-facing due to this fact. You can go around the Neo with less drastic turn, and thus be able to make the most distance with your jump. Here's a quick montage of common Neos and how I would recommend doing them. With ladders, there are two main kinds of jumps, ladders that are on the flat wall and ladders that aren't. Ladders on the flat wall are straightforward since you can use strategies like force momentum just like you can with full blocks. Just keep in mind your rotation and make sure to face slightly outward so you don't run into the wall. But if the ladder isn't on the flat wall, the jump acts as a mini Neo of sorts. Z-facing jumps will be easier, but the strategy remains the same regardless of axis. Just go to the outer corner and jam, but be sure to sneak when you get near the destination ladder as it'll make the jump much easier. And with that, you've now learned what I feel are all of the foundations of Minecraft parkour. But don't go just yet because there are still useful things that I want to talk about. Throughout this video, I've used a mod that displays useful parkour related info. This mod has way more features than what's been shown in this video, so definitely be sure to check it out. Also, if you want to get into parkour, there are a few Minecraft servers that will truly put your skills to the test. Within the parkour community, there's a style of parkour called Rankup. Rankups are massive courses that feature two types of sections. Failsafe sections are where if you fall, you just go back to the start of the section. Life or death sections, on the other hand, are sections where if you fall, you go back to a previous section, or even to the beginning of the course. It's a thrilling but challenging way to parkour, and I would most compare it to playing a roguelike. Servers that have Rankup parkour include Linkcraft, which I've been showing footage of this entire video, but also Jumpcraft, Scoville, and Parkour Universe. Omega is another parkour server, but it's unique in that players can upload and play any parkour maps that they want. It also includes some tools like teleport pads and status effect pressure plates, along with the ability for multiple people to build at the same time on the same map. There's also a Discord server for the parkour community called Parkour Central. You can talk about and get help for all things parkour, but it also has a point system where you can submit proofs of certain course completions and get rewarded with points, which the more you have, the more rare a role you can obtain. If you've stuck around for this long, I truly want to thank you for watching. I hope you've learned a lot from this video, and I'll see you next time.